Filip Ujakovic, preparatore del Sede Vita. Lui ci parlerà adesso e ci porterà dentro quello che è una sua analisi dei dati e come vengono interpretati per dare dei feedback migliori per l'allenamento. Un applauso per Filip.
Hello everyone. Please, if you refer to me or you call me anywhere else in this conference, call me People. Everyone else in this world calls me People. It's going to be simpler for you, for sure. So we will talk about ratios, or I will talk about ratios today. I work as a head of performance medicine and science for Cedevita Olympia basketball club. The department is called Performance Medicine and Science, not just so it sounds cool, but because we are trying to get recognized as a scientific organization inside of Ministry of Slovenia to get some grants and money for them. Why are we trying to do that? Well, mostly because we do research and we do science. Our scientific questions are mostly revolved where we have kind of three main projects. One is basketball load management for games and practices. Second one is asymmetries in basketball population. And the third one is using ratios or strength ratios that we're going to talk about today for decision making for development of basketball players. So if some of you were last year at a conference of EuroLink Strength and Conditioning Association, I was speaking there about testing for talent identification and performance in basketball. And this is in a way a continuation of that lecture. So I know I've seen some faces of you there. So in a sense, this is a continuation because I finished that lecture with some ratio explanations that we use after we test players. So why do we test that much and what are kind of our rules? So we have a rule inside our department that is consisted of sports scientists, MDs, physios, strength and conditioning coaches, of course. And that rule is that if we are going to talk about a player and if we are going to explain anything about management and training to basketball management or to basketball coaches, we have to start that explanation with a number. So we have to quantify things, and in that sense we have to be different from any other specialist inside a club that is maybe more connected to just basketball. Why is that important? Because I think we can contribute that to the club and the organizations, and we are it is expected of us to be kind of more leaned to quantification than just quality speaking and explaining a player. So this sounds, maybe this kind of sounds a bit more off, but did you just turn me on? Okay, so this sounds something like this. Any one of us is called by GM or a coach and says, okay, you tested that player, can you tell me something about him? You know, I think he's a bit weak on the contact. He's really told his potential, but can we develop his contact? And we start like this. So listen, we measured his max force production, and we think he's at around 60% of what he should be on that position, let's say center. And we see during the practice that he's in the contact all the time. So the problem is not whether he wants to be in a contact, but the problem is actually on his maybe the kilos or weight of the player or how strong he is. So I think that is something that we could manage. In that whole conversation, we put an anchor, which is a measurement of what is his strength capacity. This is something that we use for talent identification, which is actually an explanation of the potential of the player. But you cannot use this when you speak to the player. When you're trying to sell him a program and you're trying to kind of put your combined goal. When you talk to the player, if you compare him to anyone else, let's say you say to him, you know what, I think you miss max strength. You see this player that is on the same position as you are. He's, I don't know, 1,000 newtons stronger than you or something like that. 30% stronger than you. You don't need to speak in physical terms. And he will find an argument right away why he doesn't need that. Like, oh, but I'm not that kind of player. I do mostly, fadeaway shooting. I don't finish up like that. And of course, because you fire up defensive mechanism for a player that's fighting for position against him. And I don't think that's a good tactic. Our tactic is when we speak to the player, we compare him to himself. And how do we use that? We use ratios. So when Diego asked me if I want to speak, I always sit down with my sports scientists or guys from my department, and we kind of choose what are we going to talk about. And we always try to talk about things that a lot of young strength and conditioning coaches are maybe afraid of, which is mostly biomechanics, or any kind of measurements, or it is something that when they come to us, they have built some amount of dogmas, some kind of stories to themselves that are not true. Okay, so today our topic is beyond the single value, unpacking of ratio data for better insights. So today's lecture is going to go that we're going to talk about 5 ratios that we use. We don't use all of them on all players, but we use definitely all 5 ratios, which is dynamic strength index, force velocity profiling, bilateral deficit, eccentric utilization ratio, and I missed someone. Oh, reactive strength index, this one is important. Each one of those ratios we're going to define, not by a definition, but to explain what actually, ratio is a measurement, but a combination of measurements, and every measurement has to tell you an information. So what does that information actually tells us? Then we're going to explain what is the equation behind that number or information, and what tests do we use to measure or to get to that ratios. What is important is that there are different paths to get to ratios, but we use force platform mostly for those ratios. You can use it with timing gates, you can use it with timing cells or inertial movement units or transducers, whatever you use, but this is out of the scope of this lecture. We're going to talk about what we are doing, and the topic is maybe better for you to better maybe understand ratios if you don't. Probably you do. Then we're going to try to interpret that measure that you got. And after that, what is, I think, very important is to put it in a basketball context. If you put it in a basketball context, what is really kind of difficult for us as basketball practitioners is that when we read, if we decide to read scientific articles, it's mostly about football. And then we have to kind of, okay, what is happening in basketball? And we are trying to put everything in a basketball context, so it's maybe sometimes difficult. And then after that, we will show you how do we do interventions to play or change ratios. When we think about interventions in our organization, we think about we have 2 opportunities to do an intervention. One is through prep or preparation for practice, and second one with any kind of weightlifting, which is activation before practice, lifts after practice, or post-game lifts. Think of it that whatever is directed towards plyometrics, speed, learning how to jump, it is mostly done as the end of the prep. Whatever is in direction of force, getting heavy weights, high intensity, it is post-training lifts and post-game lifts. Okay, so this is the kind of introduction. I wanted to say I'm from Zagreb, and for the last 28 years, I think it's 28, we have a conference there, and it's in Croatian, and Francesco Cuzzolin comes every year and speaks there, and now I know how he feels when the whole conference is on language that he doesn't understand. So thank you for coming every year. It's difficult. So okay, let's start with dynamic strength index. Dynamic strength index is our favorite ratios. It's very simple to calculate and or to measure, and I think it gives us a lot of information that we can use right away. So what does it tell us? It tells us from maximal capacity that player has in strength or force production, how much of that capacity he uses during ballistic or dynamic movements, like counter movement jump in this case, which tells us, okay, our athlete is strong, but how much does he uses that when he is jumping, moving, sprinting, or whatever? How efficient is in that force used for dynamic movements? It is fairly simple to calculate. It is just you divide peak force in ballistic move with a peak force in isometric move. We use force platform for it. You can use different stuff. Okay, and then we got the information, and it's around usually, let's say you have a highly trained player in the junior team, he would go around 2,000 newtons or 2,500 newtons in ballistic move and 3,500 newtons if he's very strong and trained in isometric mid-tight pull. There will be a ratio of 0.7, something like that. I made that up, probably. Okay, and then you can have a low ratio, high ratio, and when we speak about ratios with young coaches, there are two groups, two population of coaches, how they kind of grasp ratios. So it's usually this. Either they say, you know what, ratio is not important. These underpinning numbers that you get, the performance, that's what important. This is what gives you performance. And okay, it makes sense. And then, but you cannot profile a player like that. And then the second group is that grabs this number and puts it as a rule and goes on without ever thinking what made that number. Both kind of, both perspectives are actually wrong because you need both to really understand what's happening to player and how to profile him. Let's say a player has a low DSI, which is under 0.6, which means that he uses only 60% of his max force during ballistic movements, which means that he is in a dynamic strength deficit or velocity deficit group, and you will probably work whatever you're going to work with, okay? Then you have a high DSI, which is over 0.8, and which means that he uses 80% of his force during ballistic movement, which is very efficient, and so he's a force deficit. Maybe he doesn't really have a lot of force to use, so that's why he's very efficient in ballistic movement. And then you have a moderate, do I have a pointer? I don't have a pointer. Okay, but you can read. We have a moderate DSI, which is around actually 0.7, and it's balanced profiled, and you would try to kind of get both values up in that. And this is when you read an article, you get this. But to put it in a basketball context, if you measure, when we measure our population of professional athletes, we get a DSI around 0.9. What does that actually tell us? Are our players weak? Maybe, but it also tells us that we are a dynamically ballistic specific sport. So our players should be dominant in velocity in that sense. Also, that we have selected players that are that way. So, but when we take our players and put them in the groups of low and high or lower and higher DSI, the players with lower DSI are better performers, let's say in counter movement jump performance or counter movement jump height, than high level DSI. What does that tell us? Is that we have selected players that are ballistically and the ballistic or velocity dominant, and then the guys that have lower DSI, which means they have done a lot of max strength practice, have put their force up, and they're better performers. They have added more force into their movement, so they perform better. That kind of makes sense. But if you kind of divide it in that way, then it kind of, you see that it is just not just about that number, but if to kind of put it in a context. Also, when you think about how to analyze a player, especially when it comes to under senior level players, junior, under 18s, under 20s, under 16, I don't know how categories go in Italy, you would probably get most of them in moderate DSI, which is something that we call a gray zone. So the group of young strength and conditioning coaches that come for us for practice or internships, they always think, oh, but this is a good DSI. It's actually, for me, this is the worst DSI because it's usually a gray zone and he has low force in isometric mid-thigh pull and low force inside of ballistic movement. So he's actually undertrained. Okay, so how do we intervene on this? Oh, sorry. These are replaced. Okay, if we have a strength, oh, what happened? Can you turn it on again? Sorry for this. Or maybe you can. Oh, I just did. Okay, sorry. No, I'll do it. Thank you, mate. So what are our intervention groups? So if you have a strength group or guys with high DSI, we would go with classic high intensity strength practice under just one notion. You don't need to write anything. I can send you everything, so you'll just lose time in trying to kind of build a picture around this for you. But okay, whatever you guys want. High intensity group of high intensity, low volume with weightlifting. When he's a ballistic group or he has high isometric mid-thigh pull and low ballistic or counter movement jump force, we put him in ballistic group. These are usually guys that come and this is our centers in junior team. They're really strong. We call them mountain guys. They come, but they can't really move ballistically. So we just kind of put them in the prep group that they finish every prep with a lot of ballistic movements, which are general, nothing special, just classic tests or counter movement jump or repeated counter movement jump, just to put him through this motion because he wasn't under it. And then if you have concurrent group or moderate DSI, it's a concurrent group, you have to do kind of contrast practice for that. Okay, why do I say you don't need to write anything? So this is a summary of what I just said. You don't need to take a photo. I will send you a presentation. I have this kind of cheat sheet for myself because ratios are a bit difficult because you have different ratios and what is a numerator, what is the denominator, what is the good number, what is the bad number if there is such thing. So I have these cheat sheets for DSIs around my office or around my table that I always kind of remind myself to. And I put it in a presentation, not to explain, but I put it in the presentation. If I send you a presentation, then you can maybe print it for yourself. Okay, so what if you have a moderate DSI guy, so he should be in concurrent group, but he has high force in the isometric mid-thigh pull and high force during ballistic movement. Then you would get really high performance. Then DSI is not really sensitive enough for you. So for that kind of cohort, that kind of player, you would use force velocity profile. Force velocity profiling is the hardest probably diagnosis that you can do for your athletes in strength-wise, because what it measures, it gives a kind of complete picture of athletes' ability to generate power across a spectrum of different conditions or different loads. So you put from 20 to 90 1RMs into hit for squat, and you make him jump with it. You put a linear transducer on the bar, and he measures the speed. And then you plot that. And when you plot it, you get a force velocity profile or force velocity slope. Okay, usually people get really lost really fast when it's force velocity profiling, because when they see this kind of graph, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to listen to it. But I'll give you a few kind of general things that you need to know about force velocity profile, and it's gonna be a bit more clear to you. If it's not, it's my fault. I didn't explain it well. So there is something called F0, which is theoretical maximal force. which is something that your athlete, a force that he can produce without speed or in isometric conditions. That sounds like isometric mid-tide pull. Okay, then you have a V0, which is a theoretical maximal velocity, which is a velocity that your athlete can produce in this task with really low volume or really low volume condition. It sounds like counter movement jump. If you don't put a load, it's really low volume for him. Combination of those two, or ideal combination of those two, is P max, which is a power max for your athlete or condition or load in which your athlete produces maximal power. And then you have that slope that I have explained to you, which is when you kind of graph all those forces or loads and velocities, and whatever kind of imbalance you have from that ideal graph or slope would be force velocity imbalance. So let me go back. When you go here, just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, this will be F0. If you keep on going and get to the zero load, this will be V0. So think of it that the definition of the slope would be by his maximal force production in isometric movement and then maximum velocity with zero force. Okay, so sorry, with zero movement. Why do we actually then measure? We can just measure dynamic strength index. Mostly, yes. Mostly, yes, we can measure just dynamic strength index. But when you give a guy that is really high performer, you need nuances. You need something that is a bit more clear, and then you put him on this, and it doesn't look like this. It looks like line. There's something is, you have an outlier, something is off. So in that condition, he's not really performing very well. So you can maybe be a bit more specific on what conditions, on what kind of exercise you will give to him. Okay, let's interpret. The simplest way to interpret this is the guy that have high velocity and low force. They are velocity dominant. You should do max strength with them. With the guys that have high force, low velocity, they have you have to do speed ballistic training with him. But the thing is, you have to think of in basketball context, and you can actually probably without force velocity profiling, you can see that player. And I say the guy that has high velocity, low force is an open court player. He loves to kind of play without a contact. He loves space. He doesn't really move that fast in small inside a paint, but he loves like kind of to open and round around, 3-point line. And then you have a dominant force guy. He's the guy that is always in contact, but that there is transition. Coach yells at him, "Come on, run!" And he can't really produce high jumps without a lot of time of preparation, without a minimal preparation, which is important for his condition. So if you put in a basketball, it's a bit clear. How would you do any kind of intervention for them? So any kind of intervention would be for somebody who is force deficient. We would go in same as in dynamic strength index. And with somebody who is velocity deficient, we would go with loaded jumps, with ballistic throws, and with depth jumps. But we started this conversation about a guy who is just great at everything, but we need nuances. Your graph, this graph, sorry, back. Good, we'll give you an outlier. That outlier would give you a number that the force that he is actually struggling with, and he should produce produce more speed with that load. This is the load that you can hit him with to develop him. It is that simple. That's why force velocity profile. This is something that we do once per year on one athlete who is really well trained. Usually we get players that come from athletic coaches, like track and field coaches, and they are like this. They are very good at forces, jumping, they're very good at everything, but then they maybe need something more basketball specific, or they need something low specific, because they are both only good at extremes, with low jumps or with high load lifts. Okay, let's keep on going. We did this. I complicate the world for myself. Again, summary for you guys if you're going to want it. Next one is eccentric utilization ratio. So this evaluates athletes' ability to benefit from stretch shortening cycle throughout long range of motion and slow plyometric movements, which is movements above quarter of a second. Okay, the underpinnings of stretch shortening cycle, which is this. Okay, the underpinning physiologically is, it is dependent upon a tendon property to storage elastic energy and then to use it to speed up the movement while your propulsion happens. That's one. I'll give you the three most important ones. The second one is activation potentiation, which it gives you more force and velocity or force time curve, because you have more movement, so you have more time to kind of produce force and to do a contraction. Makes sense, because it happens longer. And the third one is pre-stretch reflex, is when you stretch a muscle, brain reacts in a way that it gives more activation in it so that you can produce more force. So when we think about stretch shortening cycle and we think about eccentric utilization ratio, here we think more about this activation potentiation. How does that person uses this time or counter movement to produce more force with more speed to jump higher? Not all of what I said, but just kind of that one, because that one is the most important for eccentric utilization ratio, because everything happens in slow movement for plyometrics above quarter of a second. How do you measure it? You actually measure it height in counter movement jump divided with height in squat jump. So how much your counter movement jump is better than your squat jump? It's kind of fairly simple. And then what do you get? So if an athlete is around 10% better, this suggests that he's superior in good or superior in utilization of those stretch shortening cycle underpinnings. And we could maybe use it, do more kind of strength practice with him to get more force into potentiation. Then if he's around 1.0 in theory, he's less efficient in stretch shortening cycle utilization. He has no advantage for this counter movement part of the counter movement jump, and he has kind of poor mechanics in stretch shortening cycle. And then if he's under 1.0, which means his squat jump is better than his counter movement jump. This is very unusual findings, but you can find this with female athletes and very young athletes, because their tendons are not stiff enough to actually get force from that. They have too much slack, poor stretch shortening cycle, and one more thing, if somebody has a pain, so you have pain inhibition from jumper's knee, you would get results like this. Or he just has terrible counter movement jump mechanics, which looks like this. This happens when you get a guy that never trained for nothing. Okay, usually for basketball players, ideal would be 1.1 to 1.25. It's a kind of normative. Why? Because it's ballistically dominant sport. Again, he's using that all the time. He's adapted to that. It should be like that. This is normal for basketball player. More you go towards one, you see either problems with tendon health or you have problems with technique. So that's how we grasp that problem. If somebody has a low eccentric utilization ratio, we give him basic plyometrics. Either we give him triphasic jumping just for him to learn counter movement jump, either we give him broad jumping just to put it in a different vector, or we give him basic depth jumping. When somebody is suboptimal, which means he jumps fine, but he's not really used to it, this kind of loading, we give him either loaded jumps, medicine bell throws, or repeated counter movement jumps, just to kind of promote this eccentric phase that he uses it to facilitate this, this counter movement jump. And if somebody is really high in eccentric utilization ratio, which usually for basketball means over 1.2, we could use more force. He can either, because for basketball, squat jump is also important, not just counter movement jump. So this kind of pushing, and from that going up, there is always some kind of counter movement in that, but it is important for basketball, especially for centers. We want to make them power jumpers. What happens sometimes is that you have guys that have amazing squat jump and amazing counter movement jump and really low eccentric utilization ratio, really low, under 1.1. Those guys are power jumpers. They are usually guys that have they're laxative, they have a big slack, they have a soft jointed, but they have a lot of force in them, and they go low to jump and jump high. In that sense, so there is nothing wrong with that, but I will promote plyometrics, just to get their tendons stiff as possible, because they use a lot of force to jump up. Okay, again, cheat sheet, reactive strength index. We thought about stretch shortening cycle in long movements for plyometrics. This is just the opposite. This is just it evaluates capacity to reactive jump or stretch shortening cycle in really fast plyometrics under quarter of a second. We use equation that is jump height from drum jump divided with ground contact time. All numbers that I'm going to give to you, it is from this equation. Equation can be air time divided by ground contact time, then all the reference numbers are different, much higher, but and then Google it or find a paper with this and interpret it in that sense. But as I said, this is out of the scope of this lecture. Okay, we get numbers. What do we actually get from that? Okay, underpinnings of stretch shortening cycle. The first one was tendon properties of how much energy can he take into the tendon and then promote into propulsion movement. This is the base of this. With reactive strength index, you actually measure tendon stiffness or leg stiffness in that sense, because more stiffer the tendon, the faster the contact time will be, and it's going to be the RSI is going to be higher. So if a player, we use it to actually put a player on the kind of board of how high level is his plyometric training, or where should we put him inside a plyometric training. I think oral players are doing plyometrics, but we have to put him somewhere, because you have to know him to put him somewhere, and we use this. If he's under 1.5, this is level 1, which means that he cannot really take moderate level plyometrics. If he cannot take moderate level plyometrics, he cannot take basketball practice, because basketball practice, he just heaps of a lot of plyometrics everywhere. So we go with him through basic plyometrics training. If he's from level 2, from 1.5 to 0, something like that, he can endure moderate plyometrics training, he can endure basketball practice, and we try to develop that as much as possible. If he's level 3, that's where most of elite players are going to be. It means that he's a good jumper, good mover in dynamic movements, but we will still promote plyometric exercise with a bit more load. And if he's level 4, he's excellent jumper, and then we would still do plyometrics, but we will do probably much more weights with him and something more basketball specific. Oh, why is reactive strength index in basketball context important for us? It's because it correlates high with, it has a high relationship with all basketball specific tests. When I say basketball specific tests, I don't talk about tests that looks like basketball. I talk about tests that are mostly used to define performance or athleticism in basketball players, which are all golden standard tests. Okay, level 1, pogos, jump ropes, just classic counter movement jump learning. Level 2, more into side of force absorption or single leg pongos. Level 3, repetitive drop jumps with repetitive movements, just single leg drop jumps or loaded jumps. Level 4 will be drop box jumps, single leg repetitive drop jumps, or something more into basketball specific, like a depth jump with some kind of movement after it. Okay, and the last cheat sheet, and the last for today would be bilateral deficit. Bilateral deficit is actually a phenomenon, they say, which tells you that the sum of forces measured from a left or right leg unilaterally are higher than forces that you do in bilateral movement. Which means if I measure counter movement jump with my left leg and with my right leg, and then I sum it up, it should be higher than my counter movement jump with bilateral movement. Okay, this is normal. It should be like this. There are some underpinnings why it's there, but they are not very well explained, so I'm not going to go in that nuances and I will just lose you. But what it actually tells us, it tells us, is our player mostly unilaterally dominant or bilaterally dominant? In that sense, if somebody is unilaterally dominant, which we want, especially with guards, because basketball is, yes, dynamic and ballistic sport, but it's also unilaterally dominant sport, it shouldn't be on any extreme, but it should exist. Okay, we measure it with single leg and bilateral or normal counter movement jumps. How to interpret it? If a bilateral deficit is large, which means it is in negative, because it is the larger it is a negative percentage number, then you would suggest that the athlete is unilaterally dominant, and this is advantageous for some bilateral sports, which is not basketball. But it is not, unilaterally dominant, and this is good for sports like basketball because they are unilaterally dominant. If somebody has small bilateral deficit, or if its bilateral deficit is positive, you would, if you go through articles, it's named bilateral facilitation, then you have a better performance in bilateral jump than sum of forces inside of unilateral jump. There is something wrong there. It is usually, again, with young players, low performance players, and female players. This happens. I think this is very dangerous, and I think all of our players should be unilaterally dominant, which means that they are actually controlling their movement really good when they are on one leg, and we should kind of promote that. Forget about any correlation with performance, but I had to put it there. The ideal bilateral deficit, there is no ideal bilateral deficit. It should be kind of balanced, around 1.1. It is different with a task, but if we talk now about counter movement jump height or force, it is around 1.1 because our athletes are specialists in that movement. Okay. Oh, the intervention. Sorry. The intervention. If somebody has a significant bilateral deficit, we would go into the whole spectrum of exercises that they use in bilateral movement. Would that be high force, or the strength dominant, power dominant, or speed dominant exercise? It doesn't matter, whichever you choose. If somebody has really small deficit or even facilitation, then I would go in strong bilateral preference, or the core, I would go with dominantly using unilateral movements. We use this ratio with every young player that we have in club. Why? Because what happens, let's say I measure a player that has moderate dynamic strength, or let's say a high dynamic strength index, and I say, okay, you're a young player, you're not really trained, you should go in a lot of force, but his bilateral deficit is really small, which means he needs a lot of force. But this is not primary right now. Primary is that you control your movement unilaterally. So we would first get him through half a year of teaching him movements, plyometric movements, strength movements, whatever tasks we choose, to promote his unilateral movement, coordination, stability, control. And then after that, we would promote force. I think that is kind of right way to do it. Okay. Again, the whole. This is my last ratio. Few things that I have to say that I think to disclose, which is very important. First, I did not use one reference here because I think references during the practical lectures, which this should be, or for practitioners, just take away focus. But everything that I said today and everything that I put there on is references. For that reason, whatever I said, we put in a way, we put a little script for everything that we're doing in club. So let's say a paper, or this is a conference, I have to put a script in my club for all the people in my club, which means I have a 30, 40, 35, I think it's a review that I can send to you. It is nothing special. It is just all the information that I just told you, but it is all referenced from where I got that information. So if you want, I can send it to you. What is also important, probably you realized that during this speech that a lot of ratios are interconnected. Of course they are interconnected. Of course they have a variance that is kind of based together because they measure the same movement and they should be interconnected. So when we analyze, as we said, if dynamic strength index and force velocity profile are actually measuring the same thing, it's just force velocity profile. It's a bit more, but more nuances of the profile of the player. And when we talk about reactive strength index and eccentric utilization ratio, both kind of measure stretch shortening cycle, just different parts of stretch shortening cycle. So of course, they should kind of move together actually. And that bilateral deficit is actually the underpinning of is unilateral performance. Please, as I said, whatever you need, if you need any kind of this, of course, presentation, I can send it to you. Any kind of question that is not really, you can ask now, or if you're a bit shy, you can ask me through social, mail, whatever, just send a question. Probably won't answer right away, but I usually answer in a grasp of 24 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.